Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, July 17th, 2023. I'm Gary Starkoff. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Washington State Democrat Pramila Jayapal is walking back comments she made over the weekend about Israel. The Congressional Progressive Caucus leader sparked reaction when she referred to Israel as, quote, a racist state. We'll hear both her comments and what congressional leaders had to say about them coming up. All this comes just days before Israeli President Isacc Herzog speaks to a joint meeting of Congress that is scheduled for Wednesday, and it's just one of the items on Congress's agenda this week. The House is scheduled to work on FAA reauthorization, the Senate, the Annual Defense Programs and Policy Bill. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken is urging the Senate to act on dozens of stalled diplomatic nominees whose confirmation has been blocked by Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul. We'll hear from Secretary Blinken coming up. We begin with the comments from Representative Jayapal, who was talking to pro-Palestinian protesters who interrupted a panel discussion in Chicago over the weekend.
I'll just leave. Maybe I should just walk off.
Guys, can I say something? Can I say something as somebody that's been in the streets and has participated in a lot of demonstrations? I want you to know that we have been fighting to make it clear that Israel is a racist state, that the Palestinian people deserve self-determination and autonomy, that the dream of a two-state solution is slipping away from us, that it does not even feel possible. It does not even feel possible. And I want you to know that while you may have arguments with whether or not some of us on stage are fighting hard enough, I do want you to know that there is an organized opposition on the other side, and it isn't the people that are on this stage.
Representative Jayapal has since released a statement apologizing to, quote, those I have hurt. She also said, quote, words do matter, and so it is important that I clarify my statement. I do not believe the idea of Israel as a nation is racist. Instead, she said she believes Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's, quote, extreme right-wing government has engaged in discriminatory and outright racist policies. You can see her full comments on Twitter. House Democratic leadership weighed in yesterday on the comments. Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Whip Catherine Clark, Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar, and Vice Chair Ted Lieu said in a joint statement that, quote, Israel is not a racist state. The statement went on to say, quote, certainly there are individual members of the current Israeli governing coalition with whom we strongly disagree. Government officials come and go. The special relationship between the United States and Israel will endure. The statement did not mention Representative Jayapal by name. And this afternoon, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy also weighed in on the comments.
This isn't the first person in the Democratic conference that has continued to make anti-Semitic comments. We've watched what they have continually to do. There are a number of them over there. I think if the Democrats want to believe that they do not have a conference that continues to make anti-Semitic remarks, they need to do something about it. Because they've defended these individuals time and again. The only time action has ever been taken is when we had to take the action. I think this is a role for the leader, Hakeem, to prove that, no, they're not anti-Semitic. And they cannot allow their members to continue to say what they have said in the past. I mean, think about what we're talking about. You just raised the one issue of what she called Israel on a week when we have the President of Israel, Mr. Herzog, coming to give a joint session on the 75th anniversary of the creation of Israel. The closest ally. Within minutes of Israel becoming a country, America recognized them. But now we have leaders in the Democratic Party. She's not just elected as a Democrat in their conference. She is a leader of their caucuses. And she's making these comments. But think of before what also Congresswoman Omar said. She equated the U.S. military and Israel security forces with Hamas and the Taliban. She said support for Israel is all about the Benjamins. Supporters of Israel have allegiance to a foreign country. Tlaib, what did she say inside their conference? That she had a calming feeling when discussing the Holocaust. Who in their right mind could even say that? Betty McCollum introduced a resolution to condemn Israel and support Palestinian terrorist organization. These are just multiple Democrats on multiple times consistently saying anti-Semitic remarks, and it has got to stop. These are all individuals in the Democratic Conference. Do they think Israel is an evil state? Well, if they believe differently, they should take action against their own for the comments coming from their leadership within their own Democratic Party, and that's wrong.
As we mentioned, all this comes days before Israeli President Isacc Herzog is scheduled to speak to a joint meeting of Congress. That's just one of the agenda items on Capitol Hill this week. 4 bills are on the House agenda today, including one that requires federal agencies to write their proposed rules in plain language. Later in the week, the House will vote on legislation to reauthorize Federal Aviation Administration programs for the next 5 years. They'll also work on a bill that prohibits public schools that receive federal funding from being used to house undocumented immigrants to the U.S. The House is also continuing work on appropriations bills, and Speaker McCarthy talked about that process and the impact of amendments, particularly those put forth by members of the House Freedom Caucus, could have on getting the bills passed.
Well, the most important thing is not the Freedom Caucus, it's America. I know this is different than Washington, but the new thing here, because we have now become the majority based upon the American public trusting us, we have kept our word. The bills now get 72 hours to read them. You can now see the 12 appropriation bills that have come out. That's unheard of. You actually have to ask this question. But unfortunately for America to understand, that's how Democrats ran this place, that people couldn't see what you could vote on. So we like America to know we're not ashamed of the work we're doing. We want people to see that this is their house. This is their money of how it's supposed to be spent, and they should have a say in it. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But we have already put out forth a number of the appropriations bills to start offering amendments to. I believe 3 of them we noticed on Friday. I think it was Milcon, I think it was Ag, and Defense. So those would be the first that would come to the floor, but we want people plenty of time to be able to offer more amendments. I know last week a number of you were really concerned that I was offering amendments to the NDAA. Let me be very, very clear to all of you. We like the idea that all members have some say in what bill's done. That's the way government is supposed to be designed in a republic, in a democracy that we have here. So that may be different in a new Congress, that people actually have a say and could have more input. And you could actually have an amendment you vote on and it can fail. Or you could have an amendment that could pass and improve the bill. That's the will of the people, that's the will of the House, and that will take place.
And Eris Foley, congressional reporter at The Hill, says the clock is ticking to get the spending bills to the president's desk.
It's a lot of pressure on the House and the Senate to get these appropriation bills done in time. They're crafting billions of dollars in legislation. They've gotten a lot of work done so far, especially on the House side, but they have quite a few bills left to go on the Senate side. So yeah, they have a pretty tight schedule to get a lot of this stuff done in the next few weeks, at least as much as they can, because when they come back in September, they're only going to have a few more weeks before that government shutdown deadline.
So, and we're going to get to all of that. So let's start looking back to last week. The House passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which is a defense policy bill, but there ended up being a lot of amendments that ejected the quote-unquote culture wars into the House version. What do you think that the lessons we can take from that as we now look for, as you said, these appropriations bills that need to pass by the end of September?
Right. I mean, I think some of the partisan writers we saw get attached to the bills are similar to policies that we're already seeing coming up in appropriations, policies that are focused on kind of restricting abortion access in some way, or critical race theory, reining in diversity initiatives. So yeah, I think what we're seeing is kind of a pattern in the GOP-led House. They start with a bill that the party can unify behind. It's a little bit more partisan in nature. Even the NDAA, which tends to be more bipartisan usually, so that was an unusual partisan vote that it passed by last week. But it provides a glimpse into what we will see, I think, in the weeks ahead with these appropriation bills, because they're also very partisan in nature, and designed in a way that I don't think they're going to fetch a lot of Democratic support.
I want to show you some video. This is from CBS Face the Nation yesterday. It's Republican Representative Michael McCaul, and he says he thinks the NDAA will ultimately be a bipartisan bill.
Look, this is a process. We had a lot of amendments. Our members needed that vote. And I do think at the end of the day, we come together as a conference, and it will be a bipartisan bill. I think there's nothing more important than our national defense and our military. We give the largest pay raise in 20 years. We upgrade our triad system, our nuclear capability, hypersonics, a lot to counter China, and particularly in Taiwan. So it's vitally important we not politicize this bill at the end of the day. And I feel very confident we'll have a bipartisan bill coming out.
Okay, because you did vote to eliminate the diversity offices at the Pentagon, to deny transgender troops coverage for hormone therapy, for this restriction on funding for people to get reproductive services, including fertility treatments and abortions, to travel. None of that, you think, ends up?
Well, because that goes against...
Because none of those things will get Democratic
Well, it goes
votes.
against, since 1980, we haven't funded anything that goes towards taxpayer, abortions. I think some of the policies on culture that the Defense Department has instituted has caused problems within our own military.
So again, that's Republican Representative McCaul. The House vote was pretty partisan. Very few Democrats supported the NDAA. Very few Republicans voted against it. But what is it going to look like in the Senate, and how do they ultimately end up in a bipartisan package the way he predicted?
Right. I mean, I think it's similar to what we saw with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Republicans started with, again, a bill that the Limit Save Grow Act was their
That's the debt ceiling bill.
Right, their partisan debt ceiling plan. And it was a bill that unified the conference. It passed along partisan lines, but the bill that was ultimately negotiated with Democrats and had to make it pass the Democratic-led Senate was a bill that was much more bipartisan in nature, and conservatives and progressives voted against. And I think we're going to see something pretty similar to the NDAA, especially because the bills that we've been seeing so far in the appropriations process have been largely bipartisan.
You said appropriations. What's the difference right now in how the appropriations process is unfolding in the House versus the Senate? Right.
I mean, so the House again, it's going with its strategy of coming out with pretty partisan bills, bills that are not expected to fetch much Democratic support. On the Senate side, it's actually pretty interesting. Democrats lead the Senate just like they did last year. They expanded their majority. But unlike last year, we're in a divided Congress. They know that they have to work with Republicans, more Republicans this time, a GOP-led House, to get these bills across the finish line. So these bills have been passing so far, the first 5 bills out of the Senate Appropriations panel, in largely bipartisan supports. And I'm talking about like 29-0 margins, 28-1. It's been pretty interesting. And they do have some difficult bills, though, on the horizon that definitely will be tests for the committee. But there is this want on both sides to make negotiations, bicameral negotiations, more easy in the weeks ahead. And they think that starting with the bipartisan compromises now will do that.
Eris Foley, congressional reporter at The Hill. You can see that whole segment and Speaker McCarthy's news conference at the Capitol earlier today at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. The Senate is back in session tomorrow at 3 p.m. Senators will vote to begin their work on their version of the annual defense programs and policy bill. The House approved its version last Friday. You're listening to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Campaign 2024 coverage is your front row seat to the presidential election. Watch our coverage of the candidates on the campaign trail with announcements, meet and greets, speeches, and events to make up your own mind. Campaign 2024 on the C-SPAN networks. C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or anytime online at cspan.org. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics.
Welcome back to Washington Today. The White House is urging Russian President Vladimir Putin to reconsider his decision to pull out of an international agreement that gave safe passage through the Black Sea to cargo ships carrying agricultural exports and Ukrainian grain. The deal was struck last year to help avert global hunger. Here's more from National Security Council spokesman John Kirby.
I want to start today by addressing Russia's irresponsible and dangerous decision to suspend its participation in the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which will exacerbate food scarcity and harm millions of vulnerable people around the world. The Black Sea Grain Initiative has been critical to bringing down food prices, which have spiked as a result of Russia's brutal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. More than half of the 33 million metric tons of grain and foodstuffs that have been shipped through the initiative have gone to developing countries, including some of the most food insecure regions of the globe. These shipments have helped drive down and stabilize global prices, and every shipment under the initiative has contributed to reducing hardship in the world's poorest countries, since bringing grain to world markets lowers food prices for everybody. Russia's decision to resume its effective blockade of Ukrainian ports and prevent this grain from getting to markets will harm people all over the world. Russia will be fully and solely responsible for the consequences of this military act of aggression. Indeed, we are already seeing a spike in global wheat, corn, and soybean prices just today as a result of Russia's suspension. We urge the government of Russia to immediately reverse its decision. Meanwhile, the United States has and we will continue to work with other countries to enable both Russian and Ukrainian grain to reach the rest of the world, including by ensuring that our sanctions do not target, contrary to Russian propaganda, they do not target Russian food or fertilizer, and we will continue to support Ukraine's efforts to get that grain to markets that desperately need it, even if that's through other routes. A lot of work to be done here. This is a deeply regrettable and, as I said, a dangerous decision that we urge Mr. Putin to reverse.
This deal was brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, and President Putin had been signaling he wanted to suspend participation in the agreement, calling it one-sided, and that months of negotiations had done nothing to address Russian concerns that international sanctions on shipping, insurance, and banking had essentially prevented the export of Russian grain and fertilizer. John Kirby added today that the U.S. will continue to work with other countries to ensure the movement of grain out of Ukraine. He said the U.S. is not considering using military assets to help protect the shipments. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has sent a letter to senators urging them to confirm the more than 60 State Department nominees whose confirmation has been blocked by Kentucky Republican Rand Paul. He talked about it today at the State Department.
Earlier today, I sent a letter to all members of the Senate expressing my serious concern regarding the significant delays in confirming State Department nominees. As I made clear in the letter, these delays are undermining our national security, and they're weakening our ability to deliver for the American people. Let me just start with the numbers. At present, the State Department has more than 60 nominees with the Senate. 38 have completed all the other steps and are on the Senate floor, awaiting confirmation. Of those 38, 35 are career Foreign Service officers. Now, that number is going to keep going up as more sitting ambassadors complete their tours. More nominees come forward. By the end of the summer, we expect Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon will all be without confirmed U.S. ambassadors. 8 nominees are awaiting confirmation for posts in African countries. And it's not just the Middle East and Africa where we've got this problem. Ambassadorships are open in Asia, in Europe, in Latin America, as nominees await confirmation. So are key issue-focused positions, like, for example, our counterterrorism coordinator. During the current Congress, only 5 nominees have been confirmed. In previous administrations, the overwhelming majority of career nominees received swift support to advance through the Senate by unanimous consent. Today, for reasons that have nothing to do with the nominees' qualifications or abilities, they are being forced to proceed through individual floor votes. Over a third of those nominees have been waiting approximately a year or more, some longer than 18 months. These nonpartisan public servants have served for decades across Republican and Democratic administrations. They represent our most skilled, our most seasoned diplomats. Their talents are the products of generations of investment by American taxpayers. To defend U.S. national security, to sustain and strengthen our alliances and partnerships around the world, to ensure that our foreign policy is advancing the interests of the American people. We need our best possible team on the field.
The holdup started last month when Senator Paul stopped all confirmation votes for State Department nominees until the department releases more information on the origins of the COVID-19 virus. Here's more from Secretary Blinken.
First on the nominations. So Senator Paul has a blanket hold on our nominees, and there are additional holds that we're working through. But we have been working extensively with Senator Paul. We provided documents and other information that he's requested, but unfortunately he continues to block all of our nominees. And again, the vast majority are career officers. There are other holds out there. I can't speak to their specifics, but I can tell you we're working directly with the officers concerned to try to work through them. You're right. There are 62 nominees in the process right now. Of those, as I said, 38 are on the floor. Of those, 35 are career officers. Now, we managed to get 5 people through. And of the 5 people we got through, 4 we got through as a result of Senator Schumer moving them through the process and taking a huge amount of time of Senate business to get folks confirmed with votes. That is not the way it's been done in the past. It's not the way it should be done now going forward. It ties up too much of the Senate's time, and there is absolutely no justification for it. I'm grateful to Senator Schumer, Leader Schumer, for doing this, but that's not the way it should happen. And at the rate we're going, even if you decided to give floor time to every single one, there is not enough floor time to get through all of these nominees, and never mind doing the other business of the nation. And of course, we're in very close contact with our colleagues in DOD, working through this, and certainly there's been a lot of focus on their nominees or promotion lists, and that too is absolutely detrimental to our national security.
A spokesman for Senator Paul told CNN, quote, "Regardless of if the majority likes it, the committee will only return to expedited procedure when the chairman signs document requests with Dr. Paul, who is simply trying to access COVID-19 documents being held by various government agencies that are under the jurisdiction of the Foreign Relations Committee." You can see all of today's State Department briefing at cspan.org. Campaign 2024 news now, with 4 Republican candidates appearing at events here in Washington today. We begin with one featuring Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who spoke at the Christians United for Israel Policy Conference.
And here's the thing about BDS. You're free as a person to have whatever views you want on foreign policy, different types of policy. Maybe you don't like some of Israel's policies, to each their own. But when you concoct a movement that focuses all of your ire at the only Jewish state in this world, at the exclusion of all these other things that are going along. You don't care about boycotting the CCP. You don't care about boycotting all these rogue regimes. You only care about applying disfavored treatment to the state of Israel. That is anti-Semitism, and that is wrong. We also spoke very clearly and forthrightly about the fraud that is typically perpetrated in international organizations like the United Nations. They spend so much of their time sanctioning Israel and ignoring all these other significant problems throughout the world, and we led efforts to defund UN agencies like UNRWA that are fomenting terrorism and that are anti-Semitic and anti-Israel.
Former Vice President Mike Pence and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley are scheduled to speak at the event tonight. According to JewishInsider.com, the 3 were the only candidates invited to the event. Meanwhile, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson talked about his policy ideas and agenda for federal law enforcement at an event at the National Press Club. Here he is answering a question from Mike Balsamo, Associated Press law enforcement news editor.
There's obviously public confidence has lowered in the FBI in recent years, as has morale within the Bureau. How would you take that into account? How do you get the Bureau to a place where more of the public is confident in the ability of the agents who are working there and in the work that is done in the FBI?
Well, you do that by having balance in the reform proposals, and that's why I hope all the FBI agents that are out there in the field see this as giving them a more focused mission, to give them more transparency, to give them more credibility in the courtroom. Whenever they testify, it's not just going to be based upon simple note-taking that could be based upon human error, but you're going to have a recording in most instances to support their testimony. And so that transparency, this should build confidence in the FBI and their work. Everything that we do in our government has checks and balances. But whenever you look at the most sensitive thing, which is collecting intelligence information, there has to be guardrails. And so I see this as a morale boost for the FBI. I see this as a confidence builder for the public toward the FBI.
And amid the escalating legal troubles for Republican frontrunner, former President Donald Trump, Republican National Committee Chair Ronna McDaniel was asked whether the party would have an issue with nominating a candidate in 2024 who is under federal indictment or convicted of a federal crime.
Let me ask you a question. Do you have any problem with the Republican Party nominating somebody who's under federal indictment?
I think the presumption of innocence stands, and I think there's a lot of Republicans who are very troubled. At the end of the day, Chris, though, it's not up to me. It's up to the voters. They're going to make their decision. They're going to hear this, and they're going to decide if this is an issue for them come November or come the primary process. I'm not seeing this in the polling right now creating an issue.
Do you have any problem with the Republican Party nominating a convicted felon?
That's hypothetical. We're not even close to that. So I don't think we're even there.
I understand that he hasn't had a
get
trial
this.
yet.
I understand this trap of, well, what if this happens? I think a lot of people are very concerned, Republicans especially. I hear this every day. Why is there one set of justice for Hillary Clinton, a different for Donald Trump, different for Hunter Biden?
RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel talking to Chris Wallace on CNN. The first Republican debate is scheduled for next month on Fox News Channel. The former president has not said whether he'll participate. And you can find more Campaign 2024 coverage, including announcements, meet and greets, speeches, and events on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. You can also get it wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington, subscribe to our evening newsletter, word for word. Go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington, D.C. and across the country.
Coming up Tuesday morning, Michael Waldman, President and CEO of the Brennan Center for Justice, talks about efforts to reform the Supreme Court and his new book, The Supermajority, How the Supreme Court Divided America. And then Tina Descovich, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, discusses the organization's efforts on parental rights in public education.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal.
Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN,
C-SPAN Now, or online at cspan.org.